Your parents say you're throwing money away if you rent. The internet says you're a fool if you buy. But while everyone is shouting opinions, Jake and Marcus are running a $300,000 experiment that most people won't realize they've lost until it's 20 years too late. Everyone has an opinion on this one, don't they? If you sit down for Sunday dinner, your parents will tell you that buying a home is the only way to achieve the American dream. They'll tell you that renting is just throwing your money into a furnace every 30 days. But then you log onto the internet, and the loudest voices in finance tell you that your parents are living in 1985. They say you should rent, stay mobile, and invest the difference. You're caught in the middle, and frankly, you're not sure who to believe anymore. So, let's stop the guessing game. Let's look at two people, Jake and Marcus. To keep this a fair fight, we've neutralized the variables. They live in the exact same mid-sized American city. They both earn $55,000 a year. They both have a healthy nest egg of $60,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account. Most importantly, they both want the same thing, a 3-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood that won't make their commute a nightmare. Both men think they are the smartest person in the room. Jake looks at Marcus and sees a man tying an anchor around his neck. Marcus looks at Jake and sees a man paying someone else's mortgage. Neither of them has actually sat down to run the numbers past month 1. But we did. We factored in the rent increases, the mortgage interest, the property taxes, the maintenance, the appreciation, and the opportunity cost of every single dollar. When you lay it all out, you realize that one of them is building a generational empire of wealth, while the other is silently bleeding out, one lease renewal at a time. After 10 years, the gap between them isn't just a few $1,000s, it's not even close. Marcus decides to pull the trigger. He finds a home for $300,000. To avoid the sting of private mortgage insurance, he puts 20% down. That is his entire $60,000 savings gone in a single wire transfer. He takes out a 30-year fixed mortgage at 6.5%. On paper, his monthly mortgage payment for principal and interest is roughly $1,517. But as any homeowner knows, the bank isn't the only one with its hand out. You have to add property taxes, which sit at roughly $250 a month, and homeowners insurance at $130. Before Marcus even buys a light bulb or mows the lawn, he is looking at $1,900 per month going out the door. And remember, that doesn't even include the inevitable maintenance. Jake looks at those numbers and laughs. He finds a comparable 3-bedroom place to rent for $1,400 a month. He doesn't have to touch his $60,000. Instead, he drops that entire sum into an S&P 500 index fund, which historically averages around 8% annually. Jake's monthly housing cost is $500 less than Marcus's. He has no property taxes to worry about, no surprise repair bills, and a growing investment portfolio that he can liquidate with the click of a button. On day 1, Jake looks like a genius. He has more cash flow, more flexibility, and a huge head start in the stock market. But there is a hidden mechanism at play that Jake hasn't accounted for yet. Every dollar Marcus pays is a brick in a wall he is building for himself. Every dollar Jake pays disappears into his landlord's pocket the second it leaves his account. For the first 3 years, Jake is living the high life. When the furnace dies in the middle of a January freeze, he doesn't panic. He calls the landlord and goes back to sleep. When the roof develops a slow leak or the dishwasher starts making a death rattle, it's someone else's problem. Jake doesn't pay a dime for repairs. His only fixed costs are his rent, a tiny $15 a month for renter's insurance, and his utilities. Meanwhile, that $60,000 investment Jake made, it's doing exactly what the brochures promised. At an 8% annual return, that money has grown to roughly $75,600 by the end of year 3. Jake hasn't added a single penny of his own money to that account, it's just compounding quietly in the background while he enjoys his weekend. Marcus, however, is feeling the weight of ownership. On day 1, before he even moved his couch in, he got hit with closing costs of about $9,000. That was money spent on appraisal fees, title insurance, and origination fees, money that bought him zero equity. Then the reality of maintenance set in. Experts suggest budgeting 1% to 2% of a home's value per year for upkeep. For Marcus, that's $3,000 to $6,000 annually just to keep the house from falling apart. But here is the part that really hurts Marcus in the short term. Because his interest rate is 6.5%, the vast majority of his early payments are doing nothing but enriching the bank. In year 1, Marcus pays about $18,200 in mortgage payments. Out of that massive sum, roughly $15,400 goes straight to interest. Only $2,800 actually chips away at the principal. That interest vanishes just like Jake's rent. The only difference is that society doesn't call it throwing money away when it goes to a bank instead of a landlord. By the end of year 3, the scoreboard is clear. Jake has paid roughly $50,400 in rent and is sitting on a $75,600 index fund. Marcus has spent over $13,000 on taxes, insurance, and maintenance, and despite paying nearly $2,000 a month, he has only built about $9,500 in equity through his principal payments. At this 3-year mark, Jake isn't just winning, he is dominating. But the tides are about to turn in a way Jake never saw coming. The 3-year honeymoon phase is over, and Jake receives a letter in the mail. His lease is up for renewal. The landlord is asking for a 4% increase. On the surface, it's nothing. It's $56 more a month. Jake barely notices the difference in his lifestyle. His $1,400 rent becomes $1,456. It feels manageable, almost invisible. But this is the start of a mathematical snowball. The next year, the rent climbs to $1,514. The year after that, it's $1,575. Each individual increase is small, but they are cumulative. They are quietly eating into Jake's ability to save. Now, look at Marcus. His life has stayed remarkably consistent. His principal and interest payment is $1,517. That was the number on day 1. It is the number on month 120. It will be the number on month 360. For 30 years, that number is locked in stone. This is the fixed cost shield. While the price of milk, gas, and eggs continues to climb with inflation, Marcus's biggest expense is essentially getting cheaper every year in real dollar terms. Inflation is a homeowner's best friend and a renter's worst enemy. In year 1, Marcus's payment felt heavy against his $55,000 salary. By year 10, as his wages have likely grown, that $1,517 feels normal. By year 20, it will feel like a bargain. Jake, on the other hand, is on an escalator that only goes up. If his $1,400 rent grows at a modest 3.5% per year, it becomes roughly $1,870 by year 10. By year 20, he's paying $2,510. By the time he reaches year 30, he's looking at approximately $3,370 a month. Remember, Marcus is still paying $1,517. Something profound shifts around year 4, and by year 6, the math has completely reversed. This is due to a force called appreciation. Historically, U.S. home values have grown at roughly 3% to 4% per year on average. At a conservative 3.5% annual appreciation, Marcus's $300,000 house is now worth about $347,000 by the end of year 6. Meanwhile, through those monthly payments, his mortgage balance has dropped to around $269,000. If you subtract what he owes from what the house is worth, Marcus is sitting on roughly $78,000 in equity. That is $78,000 of net worth that simply did not exist 6 years ago. But here's the kicker. Marcus didn't actually pay for that $78,000. He only put $60,000 down. The rest of that wealth came from the fact that he was earning appreciation on a $300,000 asset while only having his own skin in the game for a fraction of that. This is leverage. It is the single biggest advantage homeowners have over renters, yet it's almost never mentioned in the rent versus buy debate. Marcus is earning returns on the bank's money. His money is working 3 times harder than Jake's. Jake's index fund has performed well, assuming he had the discipline not to touch it during a market dip. His $60,000 has compounded to about $95,000 at 8% annually by year 6. That's a solid $35,000 gain. But Jake only earns returns on the money he actually owns. There is no multiplier effect. By year 6, Jake's rent is creeping past $1,600 a month. He is now paying almost exactly what Marcus pays in total housing costs. The difference is that Marcus's payment is buying him freedom, while Jake's payment is buying him another 30 days of permission to live in someone else's house. We need to talk about the finish line. Because for a renter, there isn't one. The monthly rent is the only number people see when they look at a listing, but they forget the trajectory. Rent never stops. There is no month 361 where your landlord sends you a card saying, "Congrats, you've paid enough, you can stay here for free now." When you're 35, you pay rent. When you're 55, you pay rent. When you're 70 and retired, trying to live on a fixed Social Security check, you still have to pay that rent, and by then, that rent will be astronomically higher than it was when you were young. At the end of 30 years, Marcus makes his final payment. He owns his home outright. He can paint the walls, knock down a door, or just sit on his porch knowing he is safe. Jake, at that same 30-year mark, is writing a check for over $3,300 a month. He is still vulnerable. Renting means you don't control your life's foundation. Your landlord can sell the building. They can decide they don't want to renew your lease because they want to renovate and charge more. They can change the rules on you with 60 days notice. You are building your family's life, your children's school district, and your neighborhood ties on a foundation that someone else owns. That is the invisible cost of renting that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. Now, I would be doing you a disservice if I only showed you one side of the coin. Buying a home is not a magic pill, and it comes with its own set of brutal realities. Marcus's journey hasn't been all sunshine and equity. Before he even got the keys, those closing costs hit him for anywhere from $7,500 to $15,000. And the maintenance, it's relentless. A new roof can easily cost $8,000 to $15,000. An HVAC system failure is a $5,000 to $10,000 disaster. There are years where a $12,000 foundation repair can completely ruin your financial plans for the summer. Property taxes aren't fixed either. Even if your mortgage payment stays the same, the local government can hike taxes, and your insurance premiums can skyrocket if you live in an area prone to storms. Then there's the issue of liquidity. Marcus's wealth is trapped inside his walls. He can't go to the grocery store and pay with a piece of his kitchen counter. To get that money out in an emergency, he has to take on more debt through a HELOC or sell the whole house. Selling a house isn't free. It usually costs 5% to 6% in agent commissions plus another round of closing costs. If the market dips right when Marcus needs to move, he could be in serious trouble. But when we look at the 10-year horizon, the full story finally comes together. Over a decade, Jake has spent roughly $193,000 on rent and insurance. He owns exactly 0% of his home. His $60,000 index fund, untouched, has grown to about $129,500. In that same decade, Marcus has spent roughly $285,000 when you combine mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and those initial closing costs. He has technically spent a lot more than Jake. However, his home is now worth approximately $423,000. His mortgage balance has dropped to about $253,000. This means Marcus has $170,000 in equity. Let's look at the net worth. Jake has $129,500 in investments. Marcus has $170,000 in equity. When you net it all out, Marcus is $40,000 to $60,000 ahead. And from this point on, the gap doesn't just grow, it accelerates. By year 30, Marcus owns a home that could easily be worth over $700,000. His monthly housing cost drops to just taxes, insurance, and maintenance, maybe $600 a month. Jake, meanwhile, is still paying $3,300 every month to a landlord. Does this mean buying always wins? No. There are very specific times when renting is the smarter move. If you are staying in a city for less than 5 years, buying is almost always a guaranteed way to lose money. Between the closing costs on the way in and the agent fees on the way out, you won't build enough equity to break even. If you live in an ultra-high-cost market like San Francisco, Manhattan, or parts of LA, the price-to-rent ratio is completely broken. When a tiny condo costs $1.2 million but you can rent it for $3,500 a month, the math heavily favors the renter. Renting also works if you are a super saver, someone who takes every single dollar saved by renting and invests it with robotic discipline. But let's be honest with ourselves, most people don't do that. That extra $500 a month usually gets swallowed by lifestyle creep. It goes toward a nicer car, more dinners out, or a better gym membership. Marcus won this battle not because buying is inherently better, but because he did 3 things. He locked in a fixed cost in an inflationary world. He used leverage to let his $60,000 earn returns on a $300,000 asset. He forced himself to save every month through principal payments. The real trap isn't renting, and it isn't buying. The real trap is making a $300,000 decision based only on what the monthly payment looks like today. You have to ask what that decision costs you over 10 years, 20 years, and a lifetime. The next time your landlord sends you a lease renewal with a 4% increase that feels like nothing, I want you to run the numbers. Because over 30 years, that nothing adds up to a fortune. And in the end, that's the only math that matters.